It's time for the North Idaho Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the North Idaho Prepcast on IdahoSports.com, breaking down everything Districts 1 and 2 week in, week out here in the state of Idaho. My name is Brandon Baney, and I'm joined now by the guy who had his own special section roped off at Lapwai High School last night. This guy, he gets everybody to do everything for him. It's Ryan Scaggs.
I wish that was true. But no, hats off to Lapwai. That was such an awesome environment last night and a ton of fun. And the hospitality there for us was great. They were super pumped about us coming and doing a game. And the kids showed up, man. That was an awesome game. It was a great game last night.
Yeah, so this is obviously the lead story of what we're going to talk about. Boys basketball last night, Lakeside at Lapwai, two high-octane offenses, two really good premier 1A, D1 boys basketball programs in the state. Lapwai has won the last couple of state championships, but don't forget it was Lakeside that was on the hot run before that. I mean, between Lakeside and Lapwai, they've won, the last 6? 1A D1 championship, something like that.
Well, Lakeside, they were at 1A D2 before they came up, and they won their last title in 2020. Vander Brown was the point guard on that team that won it that year. And then Genesis Prep won it a couple years before that, but they were in the mix every year between them and Genesis Prep. They had, I think one year they had like 4 losses and didn't make it to state because there was only one bid from the North. Genesis Prep stole it. Yikes. Those programs have pedigree. And last night, man, like what a game. I mean, Lakeside came out, Lapwai came out like initially, shooting pretty well. And Elias Yearout was on a tear in the first half. Vander Brown found himself in foul trouble with about 3 minutes left in the first quarter. He had 3 fouls and spent the entire second quarter on the bench, and Lakeside took the lead. That was I'm sitting there with Greg Frisbee, who was on the call with me last night, and we were like kind of dumbfounded, like this wasn't supposed to be happening. We thought it was going to be a blowout with Vander Brown out of the game, and Brutus Sijon just came out and like took over for Lakeside. They had 4 players in double figures, and Vander Brown was not one of them. That was the type of game that they had as a team last night. Just a very well balanced effort, and defensively they played really well against Case Wynot in the first half. I was kind of saying, I'm like, man, Case really hasn't done much tonight. He had 26 points in the game, which he was 10 shy of his average on the season. So, I mean, when you're doing that, you're doing okay. But Terrell Ellenwood-Jones came out and just took over the game in the second half. I mean, he hit 5 threes in the second half, finished with 35 points in the game. Just the dude was on fire, couldn't miss. And, Elias Yearout, I think he only scored like 1 bucket in the second half. He had 17 at halftime. But it was just such a good back and forth game. Lakeside and Lapwai traded leads about 3 times in the second quarter. Lapwai went into half, I think, with like a 6-point lead. But yeah, it was a really, really entertaining game, but very hard played. And James Coach Two-Teeth did a great job with his lineup. With Vander Brown getting in foul trouble, they were still able to compete. And it was good to see, I think, for that team, because Vander's the only senior on that lineup. That team's going to be pretty good. And they got a freshman in Tyson Charlie. That kid's the truth. That kid is going to be so good. And he played really well last night. He had the responsibility of guarding Case Wynot most of the night. And they did a box and 1 on him. And it worked out fairly well. But that's how Yearout and Ellenwood-Jones were able to kind of get going beyond the arc. But it was like, if they're going to beat us, it's going to have to be probably the hard way, shooting 3-pointers. And that's what happened.
Yeah, so I was able to, so this was a game that we had last night on North Idaho game night, and Ryan, you were on the call for it. I did, so we had 3 games last night. We had your game, Lakeside Lapwai. We had a really good girls basketball game on East Idaho game night, Skyline and Blackfoot, right? That's a rematch.
That's a big rivalry, yes.
Yes, semifinal where Skyline famously upset undefeated Blackfoot. And then we had the third game, and that was the game I was at. It was a non-conference boys game. It was Malad at Grace Lutheran. I thought that was going to be a good game. It ended up kind of being one-sided. And so long story short, running clock, I got out of there in like an hour. It was over quick, which meant that I got to come home and pretty much tune into the second half. So I was pretty excited. I came on right as you guys were talking at halftime about, why not? Held to 10 points in the first half. That like never happens. And what's going to happen? And you're right. He kind of very quietly accumulated 26 points, but really impressive.
Yeah, Terrell Ellwood Jones was the story of the game. I mean, in the first half, I think he had 11 at halftime, and then he just went off in the second half. I mean, like we said, finishing with 35 points. But I mean, he was shooting from the logo, man. Like that kid, he'd dribble across half court, maybe take 4 or 5 steps, and he'd jack up a three and just hit nothing but the bottom of the net. His range is pretty outstanding for a high school point guard. But the other thing too, like I was super impressed with just the ability from Lakeside to not have to rely so much on Vander Brown. And they really showed their moxie. Like they played tough, and with 4 players in double figures, on that lineup was something that I don't think coming in that game you would say like, hey, Vander Brown's going to play 12 minutes in this ball game, and you're going to be within single digits of Lapwai in the last minute and a half of the game. And that's exactly what it was. And I told Greg, I was like, I'm calling it right now. This could be the state semifinal or championship game, depending on how seeding shakes out. Very well that we will see this game again. Like that was a very impressive effort by both teams, and I was super impressed. Obviously, Lapwai we know is good in what they can do, but with what Lakeside was able to do in standing toe to toe with the Wildcats, the Knights they showed up last night too.
Yeah, and of course the tournaments are now seeded based on Max Prep's rankings. To me, it still isn't a good practice or good exercise right now to look at the Max Prep's rankings. Because there's a lot of missing data. There's a lot of scores that are missing on Max Preps, but also B, we're still kind of in that early part of the season.
There was postponements and stuff too earlier in the year, and they only had 4 games under their belt. I think coming into this one did Lakeside, and they've got some pretty telling games coming up. I mean, they're going to play Orfino, I think, this week. They're playing Logos. They've got a game against them. I mean, so there's some games still to play for the Knights that they can, winnable games. Orfino's coming in undefeated. I mean, that's a team that nobody's really talking about. So it'll be interesting to see like how things shake out with the rankings, and very well could see Lakeside still. I mean, their 2 losses is the number 1 team and a team that's just outside of the top 5 at 2A.
Yeah, it's really impressive. And so, you mentioned Orofino real quick. I want to mention we're doing something new in the new year on IdahoSports.com. We're doing a top 25 girls and boys basketball rankings. And this is not, it's all based on our power rankings. It's what the computers,
which I was looking at today.
Yes.
And I probably deviate because we're bringing back my personal power rankings, but
yes, and we're going to get to those in a second. So whereas just a standard top 25 ranking is subjective, and I use my eye test and I base upon how teams did, the computers look at just the data. And so I got a lot of flack from Lapwai fans when I published our first top 25 list yesterday. Lapwai was, I think, 10th. And they've moved up to 7th since the win last night. I'm still in the works of publishing the new top 25, but this is going to be a daily ranking. I basically just wanted to spotlight, hey, here are the 25, some of the 25 best teams that are playing. And on any nightly, basis, did they win? Did they lose? How much did that affect their stock? That's kind of what I wanted to do. And so, and spend time and basically highlight one game or one team every day, every weekday on IdahoSports.com. So I get it. Lapwai probably, if we're using the eye test, right? Top 3, Lake City.
Would you rather, I mean, as a Lapwai fan, like this is where I would be the voice of reality, is like, would you rather see 106-34 win, or would you rather watch that game we saw last night, the 89-76 back and forth, like playing quality, good teams week in and week out? Like, they got good quality games last week at the Avista tournament, so you can't complain too much. But
yes, and so I will say part of our power ranking formula takes into account margin of victory. There's no cap on it. So initially, yes, Lapwai has been in a lot of tight games this year against very good teams, and that's still helping them, right? They're in the top 10, but some of the other schools ahead of them, like, for example, an Orofino, right? Orofino is ranked now 10th, but they were ahead of Lapwai yesterday. They're 5-0. They've had some blowout wins, and so that also weighs. But as the season goes along, that sort of stuff will even out, I believe, and we'll see Lapwai near the top where they belong. But anyways,
I'm gonna get flack from Maniac fans when I release mine. So
yes, so I just wanted to give a shout out to Orofino because they are ranked 10th in our most current, top 25 power rankings.
I'm looking at opponents right now. I mean, that's what I'm looking at. It's like, who are you playing?
Yes.
And you look at your schedule, and sometimes I know North Idaho gets shaky with like you take what you can get kind of at times, but you're a 2A school and you're scheduling like 1A D2 opponents pretty regularly. There's going to be like some give and take there. They're going to have a good meat of their schedule. They're playing some quality opponents. The Orofino is. They got Lakeside coming up. They're playing Clarkston, Washington. They're going to, so they'll be tested coming up down the stretch. They're going to have their games with St. Mary's and Grangeville and Kellogg and Priest River as well. But it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out for the Maniacs. They can make a run, and they're going to have my attention. I mean, I'm looking at them, but early on, there's some. I still have question marks there.
Right. So let's do it. Without further ado, it's back and better than ever for 2023, baby. It's the North Idaho 9.
We need Paul to do a graphic and a voiceover for it for us too. Like we little fanfare for this one.
Right. The North Idaho 9.
Yeah.
Okay.
The rankings nobody asked for.
That's right. This is Ryan Scaggs' personal top 9 rankings each week, boys and girls basketball in North Idaho. Okay, so here is the debut list. I'm going to put it up on the screen. It's going to roll across the bottom like we're on SportsCenter, and then you just talk about the list. But here is your initial North Idaho 9 for boys basketball.
Shocker, number 1, Lake City. I don't think anybody saw that coming, except for everybody else. They're on a roll. They're on a tear. That's a team of destiny, in my opinion. I don't know if – I look at their schedule. Coeur d'Alene could give them a few fits, but I think that lineup is just so dynamic. It's going to be tough to touch them. Lapwai at 2. Sorry, Wildcat fans. I love your team, but I don't love them more than Lake City. It's just not going to happen. I want to put you on the same court. I think it's a great game for a half. Colton Mitchell, in my opinion, would take that game over. CDA at 3. I like the Vikings a lot. Their lineup week in and week out, they're so multiple. Their bench plays very, very well. They're unselfish. They can get 20-point nights out of a number of kids on their lineup. And then they can stretch the floor with a lot of guards. So I think their guard play is so good that, I don't know if we've seen their best game from them yet either. And that's the scary part about that Viking team. I've got Bonners Ferry at 4, quietly undefeated. Had a couple good wins under their belt. That Badgers team, much like the football teams, kind of just like setting their nose to the grindstone and just quietly chipping away at their opponents they've got coming through. But I like their lineup. I really do like, some of the kids they've got on the field. The Williams kids are great. So, number 5, I got the Bengals. I still think that they've got some of their better games in front of them. They did get a tough loss to Lapwai last week. They bounced back, beating Clarkston. There's a lot to be said about that team. I think that, they're going to mature. I think there's still some growing pains with the experience and learning, the new coach and kind of figuring out how that all meshes together. But I think, they're going to be better for it later in the year. 6, I've got Kamei. The Cubs are a team I look at that they're kind of interesting. They're like a bunch of post players out there. It's that they got probably one of the bigger lineups. If you look at, average height throughout the team, they're pretty big. They don't really have a true point guard, but they play just very soundly on the defensive end. They like to slow the game down, but they're taking care of business. 7, I got a tie with St. Mary's and Lakeside because they've split between each other. I don't know. There's 1A and 1B there with them. Setting those two teams apart, St. Mary's could still make a run to the state. Orofino's going to try to have a say in that, obviously, as Kellogg will too. I think that league is very competitive this year. Number 9, I got Kendrick. I like the Tigers. I like the athleticism. I just they'd like to win, and it's very evident how they play. It's not always going to be pretty, but they're always going to give a great effort. They're a bunch of athletes. So they can run around the court, and they'll play well, and they're well coached too. And then just sitting outside of there, I would have Orofino sitting on the outside looking in, just because I'm not sure about them yet. they're undefeated, but there's a caveat with it. Like who have you played, where have you played, that type of stuff. I look at Lapwai last night. That was their first home game this year. So that tells you what that team has had to do to get their games. They've been on the road the entire season until last night. So that comes into play with who you're playing, but not only that, but where are you playing? And so that's my top 9 for this week. It'll probably change because there's some games coming up tonight and tomorrow and Saturday that will definitely have a say in what's going on.
That's the great thing about hoop season. You want to hear a different story, just hang around for another day. I mean, there's so many games and so many wild results that, it usually changes on a whim, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a stretch there. Like I said, with Orfino, like they could pick up 3 nice wins right back to back. I mean, they're going to have Logos, Kendrick, and Lakeside coming up in the next week. Like they get all 3 of those games. I mean, that's going to be, obviously a 2A school playing that schedule, but you kind of got to take what you can get. And, but there's some good teams in there. So that's going to tell you what kind of program they've got.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun. So let's take a look now at your North Idaho 9 for girls basketball.
Man, I could have had a 3-way tie at first. Let's be honest.
So here's the North Idaho 9 girls.
You know why I have Coeur d'Alene at 1?
Well, I'm curious because we just released the new coaches poll today as well, and Coeur d'Alene had leapfrogged Lake City.
Yeah.
Last week CDA was 2, Lake City was 1. This week they're flip-flopped. So yeah, please enlighten me.
That reason probably. I had to pick somebody.
Oh man. Hey, at least you're honest.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, like I have them in Lake City. Post Falls I still see as, while they're undefeated, I can't really knock them too much, but I'd look at like the reason I put Coeur d'Alene at 1 though is like I looked at who they lost to, and they lost to a team in Folsom. My aunt was the coach there back in like the late 80s at Folsom High School. So little nugget of information I found. Yeah. For me, like, I'm like, oh, that's a good win. Like, that's a good historical program in California. Like, a lot of good athletes have come out of that program. And it was a close game. And I mean, so you look at like kind of who you're playing. Well, Coeur d'Alene was at one well-known tournament. Lake City was at another. And they, Coeur d'Alene had to play Mater Day as well. And that's another, who's who program as well for girls basketball. So, both those losses, I mean, I look at those and I'm like, okay, like I can see Coeur d'Alene probably getting the edge there, but Lake City in their own right, they took a couple losses at the Nike Invite, the tournament champions down there and in Phoenix. And, those were good teams they lost to. And then you look at Post Falls and who they played. I wouldn't say they were on the same level as some of the other teams that they played in their tournament at the Gisa Invitational over there in Wenatchee. But they're still undefeated, and they're still a program that's very much to be reckoned with. And I think we'll know a lot in the next 2 weeks out of these 3 teams, kind of who organizes the pecking order. But I look at it going to districts, and it could be a coin flip like last year. It really could.
Yeah, and that is just crazy to wrap my head around for the second consecutive year, how nuts that is all going to be. Yeah, I do. I want to go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you're fine.
Well, I wanted to give Post Falls some love. I feel like, there's nobody is beating the drum for those girls. I mean, we talk about them on the Prepcast, and
if we start tooting their horn, they're going to start losing. I mean, like that's how it works, right? If we start like drumming somebody up, they get a weird loss. Like, so I got to keep quiet if I want Post Falls to keep winning.
Yeah, I know our colleague and the Post Falls girls basketball coach, Brian Hall, he says, yeah, you're not talking about us enough, but but
they're good. They're really freaking good. Like, I don't know what else I could say. Yeah.
We could spend the whole show. We could spend 30 minutes talking about them, and Brian would still be like, I don't know if you got
We're going to get to the point where like the difference between Coeur d'Alene, Lake City, and Post Falls is going to be like their student managers. Like, that's what's going to be the difference between the 3 teams. Like, who drinks Gatorade at what point in the game, and like that's okay. That's who gets the edge. Like, come on.
Speaking of that, I don't mean to dovetail off, but we did this the last show we did with Santa themed movies. But did you see? Speaking of managers, did you see what happened to Texas A&M? Their men's basketball team. They're playing Florida earlier this week. Did you hear about this?
I did not hear about this.
They show up to the arena to play Florida, and they're on the road. and the student managers forgot to bring the team's uniforms from the hotel. So they had to this is like the highest level of Division I basketball. This is the SEC. So they had to take the bus back to the hotel, get the jerseys. The game got delayed by 15 to 20 minutes. And Texas A&M was assessed a technical foul for delaying the game. And so Florida gets to shoot free throws right out of the gate. Now Texas A&M won. And so, but man,
could you imagine if that game came down to a 1-point game at the end and Florida won?
Yeah, they wouldn't be the managers anymore.
Like pulling a Thurman Thomas. I don't know if you know about that story, but
no,
the Super Bowl against one of the Super Bowls against the Cowboys, Thurman Thomas forgot his helmet.
Yeah, he lost his helmet for a play or two.
Yeah, he lost at the beginning of the game. He couldn't find his helmet anywhere, so he couldn't get in the game.
Yeah, that's crazy. My wife was a student manager for the Montana State University women's basketball team for a season, and she did not like it. So,
yeah, there's a lot of stress. I had kids that I had coached in football that were managers at WSU. They were on the equipment staff, and they treat the kids really good. One of them now works for the Seahawks, but it sets you up for later in life. But yeah, what you have to go through is crazy. But we're kind of dovetailing or taking a rabbit trail.
Yeah, sorry.
From the rankings, we'll go number 4, Lapwai. I mean, they're doing all they can do. I mean, let's just put it that way. But I think those 3 teams in front of them are just, I think, a little echelon better. 5, I've got Sandpoint. I said that at the beginning of the year, and I stand on it that I picked them to come out of the league. I think Sandpoint's got a year that they can make a bit of noise, and they're in the rankings in the state. I mean, they're in the top 5. So I think they're at number 4 or number 5 this week in the coaches poll. 6, I've got Kendrick. 7, I've got Prairie. The reason I've got Kendrick ahead of Prairie, Kendrick beat him in the head-to-head so far, and they can prove me wrong tonight because I think they play each other at 7:30 this evening. So things can change, right? 8, Camei is quietly, just kind of lurking there in the White Pine League, having a great season. And number 9, I've got Deary.
Yeah, Deary undefeated still. They haven't played a ton of games yet, but
yeah.
So a couple of things basketball wise, and then we can move on to wrestling. Just a couple of notes, things I noticed. The Avista tournament, right? Lapwai boys and girls win the team titles.
Yep.
I thought it was so great on the girls' side, especially that you've got Lewiston and Moscow and Clarkston and Pendleton, Oregon, and all these big teams. And what does the girls' championship come down to? Lapwai and Prairie.
Yep. Well, it's just the quality. Like I said, that White Pine League can probably compete at any level. If you take the starting 5 of most of those teams, they're going to play the starting 5 of most of the other ones. And, it shows up. Like we talked about it last night in the broadcast, those kids are playing on select teams, and you're playing on select team in the summer. You're playing against the big dogs, like especially on the boys side, you've got, Case, who's on the same team as Liam Campbell. And like that, I mean, it's the who's who of high school basketball. Vander Brown would be starting on any team in the state of Idaho. Like, I have no doubt in my mind about that. I mean, foul trouble or not, but yeah, I mean, Terrell Elwood Jones, I'd take him as point guard over, most other guys in the state with a few exceptions. So that's just the quality of basketball, those lower levels. I think the playing field's so dang, it's just right there. I mean, it's going to go to bench play, I think, is your dividing factor at this point.
Yeah. So I wanted to give a shout out there to Prairie and Lapwai. And then also I was so bummed. We were all set for, and by the way, I did an article about this, how Idaho has pretty much just cleaned up against all of their out of state opponents. It's on the homepage at IdahoSports.com. Idaho has won 64% of their games, girls and boys, against out of state opponents this year. The only state where they've played, there's been some one-offs, Lake City played that team from North Carolina, and Coeur d'Alene played a team from Florida. But besides the one-offs of states that we've played 10 plus games against, Utah is the only state where Idaho has a sub 500 record. So Washington, Oregon, we're beating the crap out of those states, and I love to see it. So that's why
we're going to shake our fist at the Southeastern Idaho teams for choking against Utah because they're the only ones getting games against them.
Yeah, East Idaho, come on,
calling you out on the North Idaho Prepcast. Yeah, shots fired.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll get East Idaho real riled
up. Get Sean. Yeah, Sean will end up sliding into my Twitter DMs
He'll be like, now wait a minute. Century's girls went to the Tarkanian Classic and won their bracket, which they did. So congratulations there. Okay,
But
so
so did a North Idaho team last year. So
right.
what?
So we're going to spark this rivalry.
We did it first, right?
That's right. I love it. Okay, so I wanted to talk about speaking of out-of-state opponents, and you should give that article a read.
It was good. I read it. Yeah, I went through that. That was very informational and a lot of time on your hands. I don't know how you came up with the time to do that, but that was mathematically, I'm sure, not easy.
No, and I'm a guy that doesn't enjoy math, so that was not fun. But it was it's fun to see it now that it's finished. But we were expanding our reach as Idaho. We were going to play the two states that aren't connected, not part of the continental 48, right? Sandpoint went over to the Punahou Invitational in Honolulu, went 2-2. And really were in, those two losses, they were right in it. So Sandpoint, I thought, had a good showing, but I was so bummed. Sitka, Alaska was supposed to fly down and play Clearwater Valley, Deary, and I think it was Kendrick. Yes.
Yeah.
The email I got from our good friend Alan Hutchins, the athletic director at Clearwater Valley, said, yeah, we heard from Sitka. They're trapped in an airport somewhere and they're not going to be able to make it.
Yeah, they couldn't get it connecting with that freezing rain that came through. It pretty much put the clamps on anything, especially if they were flying Alaska, because Seattle was the hub and it was locked down. And that sucks.
I was so bummed we didn't get to see those games happen, because it would have been a cool thing to talk about, but there's always next year, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe they'll travel to Alaska next year.
Oh, how cool would that be?
Send us Paul
again,
the editor at IdahoSports.com for any advertising that you want to have that go and have us cover those games. Fishing pole will travel. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go. That's our podcast title. That fishing pole will travel. Okay, so let's get into wrestling now before we wrap up. This is a big weekend, obviously. The Rollie Lane invite at the Idaho Center in Nampa. I'll tell you, we did our Matt Chat Prepcast on Tuesday night, our wrestling only podcast that we do on IdahoSports.com. A lot of Post Falls fans on there saying, hey, this is the time. Watch out for the Trojans. We're going to come down and I think open some eyes a little bit. And I'm inclined to agree.
Absolutely. That was one thing. I did a couple Post Falls basketball games last week. And you look at the banners hanging in the gym, and there's like one blaring thing that like stands out, and that is, I know, I get it. The Southern Idaho teams sometimes get a lot of kids two at each weight because they get more bids and whatnot. But Sandpoint brings the toolbox, and it's usually full of hammers, and they're showing up on the mat. And I think that they're going to do a little talking, I think, this weekend at Rollie Lane and show their stuff. They're a really, really solid team. They're going to make some noise. I mean, they may not get 26 guys into the state tournament. They might bring 17 or 18, but what they're bringing, they're all quality kids. So, and I look at the upper weights right now, like you look at Gentry Smith and Trevor Miller, they're, wrestling as good as anybody in the state right now at the upper weights. And so I think that Trevor can really especially make some noise this weekend. He obviously signed his letter of intent for football at the University of Idaho, but you look at those two dudes, and they're on a different level right now. Tyson Barnhart's been wrestling super well at the lower weights. Obviously Ryder has been doing great for Post Falls. So there's going to maybe some noise. I mean, I look at like Hoyt Haas from Lewiston, if they're going to go down there, they're going to the gut check over in Western Washington. He's going to make some noise. There's some really quality kids you get from like Ording and some of those schools over there on the west side. That's going to be a quality tournament for the Bengals as well. And I think that you could see a few of them bringing home some hardware from that tournament.
Yeah, Lewiston and Moscow are headed over to the gut check in Kent, Washington. Kent's right outside of Seattle, right?
Yeah, just south. It's South King County. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and this is a tournament. We brought this up on the Matt Chat Prepcast earlier this week. 2 years ago, Blair Academy went all the way over there to compete. So that tells you, and they're in New Jersey. So that tells you the caliber of tournament this is going to be.
You're going to get like Lake Stevens, Ording, Olympic, the South Kitsap. There's a bunch of programs over there that are just really, really solid that'll be there. And I think that they're going to have guys that are going to compete. especially like you look at Hoyt and Storm at heavyweight. He had a great showing at Tri-State, finishing in the top 4. So there's going to be, some dudes that are going to, I think, fare pretty well over there on the west side of Washington this weekend.
Yeah, and Moscow will be there competing. We did want to give a shout out to Skyla Zimmerman, the great standout wrestler from Moscow.
Congrats to her.
Signed her official letter of intent yesterday. Southern Oregon. She's going to.
That's a great women's program. I mean, that's one of the top echelon women's programs in NAIA, and so that's a huge deal for her. And getting an opportunity to wrestle at the next level for a great team and a great program, like that's big. That's big time. Like for her to get that accomplishment coming out of Moscow, and a great showing for girls wrestling in the state of Idaho. I mean, you got her, and then you look at Alyssa Randalls, and I mean, there's a number of girls that are going to wrestle at the next level from the state of Idaho, especially from North Idaho. I mean, that's great. I mean, it's great for the sport. It's just growing it. Girls wrestling is the fastest growing sport in the state of Idaho right now. And, Skyla's probably a big reason, part of that. I mean, some of that success. So that's just an awesome deal for the Bears and for Skyla and her family.
Yes. Big shout out to Skyla Zimmerman. And then before we get out of here, Ryan, there was one more shout out I wanted to give. This is a late shout out, but all of our fans up in Bonners Ferry, and I really feel like that's an audience we've grown a little bit this year. We've got a lot of Bonners Ferry fans.
Except they don't have a Twitter page, so I can never tag them on anything. But yeah,
I know.
I tag the newspaper.
Yeah, so this kind of flew under the radar, and it wasn't really on my radar until I was just kind of scrolling around and checking things over the holiday break. But December 15th against Rogers, Washington, Bonners Ferry played Rogers, and in that game, it was a pretty cool accomplishment. Braden Blackmore crossed the 1,000 point barrier for his career. So this is something that didn't get a lot of pub, and I wanted to make sure that Braden Blackmore and those Bonners Ferry boys are still playing really well.
Yeah, absolutely.
As evidenced by where they're ranked in your North Idaho 9, but scoring 1,000 points in a career, tremendous accomplishment. Congratulations to Braden Blackmore.
Yeah, hats off. I mean, and that, I'm sure he's going to give he's a pretty humble kid. He's going to give a lot of attribution to his teammates too, and his coaches for helping him get there. But that's a great accomplishment for him, and in a a school that Bonners Ferry, where it's situated with the league and stuff, it's like you're going to get a lot of, Spokane schools that are looking for extra games, or you're going to get Montana schools, or, so you're just playing who you can, and he's getting his points. He's doing it. He's getting it done. And I know him and his teammates would love to make a run at state this year. I know that they would love to bring some hardware home and finish with get to the third day. I think that's the big deal for them this year is getting to that third day of the state tournament, and coming home with a trophy would be a big, big plus for that team, because they've been playing really quality basketball, and they've got a lot more left in them. And I look at their schedule ahead of them. There's some big games ahead, but I really like how that Badgers team is just built, and they just like to be around each other. You can see the camaraderie with that team. And so, yeah, the 1,000 point for Braden, that's an awesome job and a huge accomplishment, and congratulations to him and his teammates.
Yeah, it's really awesome to see. So, all right, well, that'll do it for this week's edition of the North Idaho Prepcast, off and running here in the year 2023.
Yeah, I believe I got Post Falls and Lewiston tomorrow night, girls and boys basketball. So
yes, we are off and running with North Idaho game night. We did the little 3-game series between Post Falls and all those teams from East Idaho. I had a really good game against Bishop Kelly. The first game, BK put up a 3 as time expired. It bounced like 5 different times and went in, but then they waved it off. It was too late.
That Eagle game that I had was a great game. That Eagle Post Falls game came down to the last 30 seconds. The Eagle took the lead under a minute left in the game. So Post Falls, for what they've got, they're competitive. They compete. They play hard. It's just there's some bumps in the road there, I think, with that lineup, but it'll be interesting to see how they go. I'm anxious to see the girls play against Lewiston on Friday night.
Yes, and it was one last note. Talking to Mike McLean, the longtime boys basketball coach at Post Falls, before that Bishop Kelly game last week, I was talking to him, and he was like, I'm at the point in my career now where I don't worry about the the wins and losses and the max preps and all that stuff. He said, basically, I just want our team to get better and be playing our best basketball at districts, because in a 14 district, I mean, anything can happen. Crazy things happen all the time, which is true. And then he also said something that I thought was pretty interesting. He said, for a good 7 or 8 year stretch, we were the top dog, right? We were the team that was going to state and everybody was trying to knock out every year. He said, I'll tell you what, it's kind of nice being the hunter instead of the hunted. So,
sure. There's a little bit more, of Las Vegas in him, I think, now, with just being able to go out and play with house money. And his kids play hard for him. They really do. I mean, they're a fun group to watch. The results don't always go their way, but you're not gonna slide them for effort. And I look at who's sitting next to him on the bench, Coach McLean on the bench, his assistant coach. I don't know if you realized who was sitting next to him or not, but that was Jason Ulrich, who was Lewiston's coach. He's now his assistant coach, sitting on the bench next to him. So that's pretty cool. I think he's got a good staff around him, and the kids respond. I mean, the kids play super hard, so you can't slight them for effort or anything else. It's just sometimes the games just don't turn out your way, and that's where they're at record wise. But they play really hard. They really do.
Yeah, it's really fun to watch them play, and we'll have plenty of Post Falls games for you throughout the year. North Idaho game night back up and running. If you want to see our broadcast schedule of games, just go to IdahoSports.com and click on the Game Streams tab across the top of the homepage, and you'll see not only for North Idaho, but all the games we plan on broadcasting statewide. So, all right, have fun this weekend, Ryan. Should be a couple of good games. So,
yeah, you as well. Enjoy your call this weekend, and maybe we'll get you up here sooner than later for finally doing a game side by side.
Yes. Oh my gosh. A legendary moment in sports broadcasting history when you and I get to do a game together.
The stars will align. Yes.
It's gonna be great. So yeah. Anyways, until then, thanks for tuning into the North Idaho Prepcast, everybody. We'll see you back here next week on Idaho
Happy
Sports.
New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year. 2023 off and running. We'll see you next time on IdahoSports.com.